I stand at the edge of the quiet gathering after my sister Eleanor's funeral. A sea of black coats and somber faces. But my focus is pulled to one corner of the living room. My nephew, David, her only son, speaks in a voice that is too loud, too crisp for the occasion. He tells a small group of investors that the sale of this old house, the one I have lived in for 40 years, is a sure thing. He plans to tear it down, along with the other old houses on the block, to make way for gleaming glass and steel condominiums. He calls it progress. I am nothing more than a tenant in his way, an old woman with no legal rights, no visible income to fight him. His motive is clear, a quick and massive profit. But as he glances my way, a smirk touches his lips when he sees the old leather-bound ledger in my hands. He has often called it my little diary, the sad scribbles of a lonely old woman. He has no idea that the words inside that book are the very thing that will turn his world to dust. The weight of the day presses down on me, a physical ache in my chest that has little to do with my 72 years. The low hum of conversation feels distant, muffled, as if I'm listening from underwater. My grief is a private, silent thing, a hollow space inside me that echoes with every tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, a clock our father wound every Sunday morning without fail. Now, its steady rhythm seems to mock the stillness in my heart. Eleanor is gone. My older sister, my only sister, the one whose laughter was like wind chimes on a summer breeze, is now just a memory held within these very walls. My eyes drift to the kitchen doorway, and for a fleeting, painful moment, the present melts away. I see Eleanor as she was just last Christmas, a dusting of flour on her cheek, her hands deftly shaping dough for her famous apple pie. The scent of cinnamon and melting butter was her signature, a smell that meant love and home and safety. "Glada, stop hovering and make yourself useful," she would have teased, her eyes twinkling. "Peel these apples before I lose my patience." The memory is so sharp, so real, that I can almost feel the smooth skin of an apple under the blade of a paring knife. Then it shatters, and I am back in this room filled with polite strangers and the suffocating scent of lilies. The absence of her is a physical presence, a void that consumes all the air. David moves through that same doorway, not with a tray of pie, but with a sleek tablet in his hand, swiping through blueprints with a man in a suit I don't recognize. He is tall and handsome, just like his father was, but he lacks his father's kindness. There is a coldness in his eyes, a sharpness that calculates and assesses everything it sees. His wife, Susan, is a perfect match. A thin, elegant woman whose smile never quite reaches her eyes. She runs a manicured finger over the dusty mantelpiece, then subtly inspects it for grime. I watch as her gaze falls upon a framed, cross-stitched sampler Eleanor made in high school. It reads, "Home is where the heart is." A faint, almost imperceptible sneer curls Susan's lip before she turns away. They look at the worn furniture, the faded wallpaper, not with nostalgia, but with disdain. They are vultures, circling, waiting for the last breath of sentiment to fade so they can pick the bones clean. I retreat to the small armchair by the window, the one Eleanor always sat in to read the morning paper. The cushions permanently indented with the shape of her. The worn chintz fabric feels familiar and comforting. From here, I can see the street, the row of modest, well-kept houses that line Oak Street, the Gable House, with its freshly painted porch swing, the Hendersons, where 3 generations have grown up. This isn't just a collection of buildings, it's a tapestry of lives, woven together over decades. And David wants to tear it all down for a quick profit. I open the ledger on my lap. Its leather cover is soft and cracked with age, the pages filled with my neat, looping handwriting. To anyone else, it would look like a simple, meticulous account book. It is my secret history. In the life I lived in the shadows while everyone assumed I was doing nothing, my fingers trace the first entry. Made 15 years ago. October 22nd. Purchase number 18. Oak Street. Title held by Eleanor Preservation Trust. It was the first one. The house of a childhood friend whose children wanted to sell to the highest bidder. A developer just like David. I couldn't let that happen. So I stepped in, quietly, using the money I had carefully, secretly amassed over a lifetime of shrewd, unseen investments. One by one, I bought them. When a family needed to move, when an owner passed away, when taxes became too much, I was there. I kept the rents low, just enough to cover maintenance and taxes. I made sure the plumbing was fixed, the roofs were sound, and the gardens were tended. The residents of Oak Street know me only as the quiet Miss Clara, the agent for their anonymous landlord, a benevolent trust located in another state. They have no idea their landlord lives right here, in this armchair, watching over them. Even Eleanor never knew the full extent of it. I told her I managed a few properties for a client to supplement my small pension. To tell her the truth would have burdened her with worry. It was my secret to keep. My silent promise to our shared past. Me fingers, tracing the columns of numbers. Brush against the small, antique brass key I wear on a chain around my neck. It rests against my skin, always warm. It doesn't open any door in this house. It opens a safe deposit box downtown. A box filled with the original deeds to every single property on this block, and the 3 surrounding it. It is the key to my fortress. The ultimate proof of my quiet, invisible life's work. My family has always underestimated me. I was the quiet one, the bookish one, the unmarried one who was content with a simple life. They saw simplicity and assumed it was a lack of ambition, a lack of means. It was a useful shield. That assumption, it allowed me to move unseen, to build my quiet empire, while they were busy chasing things that shone brighter but were worth so much less. Just then, David approaches my chair, his shadow falling over my ledger. He forces a look of strained concern onto his face. Aunt Clara, are you doing all right? This must be so much for you. He gestures vaguely around the room. Don't you worry about a thing. Susan and I will handle all the arrangements. The condescension in his voice is as thick as honey. He sees a frail old woman, lost in grief, clinging to a dusty old book. He has no idea he is speaking to the woman who holds his entire future in her hands. I look up at him, my expression placid. That's very kind of you to offer. David, I say, my voice soft. Your mother would be so proud of how you're taking charge. He preens at the compliment, his chest puffing out slightly. Well, someone has to be practical, he says, his eyes flicking towards his investor. Mom was always too sentimental about this place. The insult to Eleanor's memory is a sharp, physical blow, but I let none of it show on my face. I simply nod and close the ledger gently. The air in the room suddenly feels thick, suffocating. I need to get out, away from the polite murmurs and the predatory smiles. I stand up, my joints protesting, and make my way to the back door. The cool evening air of the garden is a relief. The roses Eleanor planted decades ago are in full bloom. Their sweet fragrance, a balm to my raw nerves. I stand there for a long time, my hand resting on the cool metal of the key around my neck, watching the sun dip below the rooftops of the houses I have sworn to protect. The fight is coming. I can feel the storm gathering on the horizon. I am old, and I am tired, but I am not weak, and he has no idea what he is about to unleash. A week after the funeral, the official notice arrived. It was delivered by a courier, a crisp, impersonal envelope that felt cold to the touch. Inside, the legal language was dense, but the message was brutally clear. I had 30 days to vacate the premises. 30 days to pack up a lifetime of memories, to leave the only home I had ever known. David had wasted no time. Reading the words, a tremor started in my hands. A deep, unsettling fear that had nothing to do with logic. I knew I had the power to stop him. Yet the raw aggression of his attack left me shaken. This wasn't just a business transaction for him, it was a conquest. I sat at the kitchen table, the eviction notice lying next to a half-empty cup of tea that had gone cold. The house was unnervingly quiet without Eleanor's constant puttering. The silence pressed in, amplifying the frantic beating of my own heart. For a moment, a wave of profound guilt washed over me. Why had I kept my secret for so long? Even from her, I had told myself it was to protect her from worry, to shield her from the complexities of my financial world. But now, alone in the quiet kitchen, I had to face a more difficult truth. Perhaps I had also kept the secret to protect myself. It was my own private world, a place where I was not the overlooked younger sister, but a person of quiet power and influence. Sharing it would have changed our dynamic, and I hadn't been ready for that. I had wanted to preserve the simple, loving relationship we'd always had, and now I was paying the price for that secrecy with this gut-wrenching fear. David called that afternoon. His voice was slick with false sympathy. "Aunt Clara, I just wanted to make sure you received the paperwork," he said. "I know this is hard, but it's for the best. The house is falling apart. It's a money pit. The roof is new, and the furnace was replaced 2 years ago." I replied, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I knew because I had paid for it all. He ignored me. "Look, I've found a wonderful place for you. It's a senior living community just outside the city. It's clean, and you'll be around people your own age. They have organized activities. Bingo. I think." The condescension was suffocating. He painted a picture of me as a helpless, senile old woman who needed to be managed and put away. "I am not interested in bingo. David," I said quietly, "you need to be realistic." He snapped, his patience wearing thin. "You have no income, no savings. How do you expect to live? I am your only family, and this is my final offer. I am trying to be generous here." Generous. He was throwing me out of my home, a home he intended to destroy for profit, and he called himself generous. I ended the call, my hand shaking so much I could barely place the receiver back in its cradle. The fear was turning into something else now, something hard and sharp. It was anger. The next day, I took the bus downtown. I deliberately avoided calling a taxi. It was part of the role I played, the persona I had carefully maintained for years. The quiet, frugal Miss Clara wouldn't dream of such an extravagance. The bus ride was long, giving me time to watch the city change. The familiar old brick buildings giving way to towering glass structures that all looked the same. It solidified my resolve. Arthur Finney's law office was on the 3rd floor of one of those old brick buildings, the kind with a rickety elevator and frosted glass doors. The air inside smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Arthur had been my father's lawyer, and now, in his late 70s, he was mostly retired, taking on only a few select cases for old clients. He greeted me with a warm, wrinkled smile. "Clara, my dear," he said, taking both my hands in his. "I was so sorry to hear about Eleanor. She was a wonderful woman." "Thank you, Arthur," I said, sinking into the worn leather chair opposite his massive oak desk. "I'm afraid I'm not here for a social call." I laid the eviction notice on his desk. He put on a pair of reading glasses and scanned the document, his bushy white eyebrows knitting together in a frown. "He's not wasting any time." "Is he?" Arthur muttered. He looked up at me, his eyes full of concern. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" "Clara, we can make him an anonymous offer. Buy the house from him at a generous price. You wouldn't have to reveal anything." I considered it for a moment. It was the easy way out, the path that would cause the least amount of conflict. But when I thought of David's smug, dismissive voice on the phone, the way he had insulted both me and his mother's memory, I knew I couldn't back down. "No," I said, my voice firm. "He has made this personal. He wants to erase this house, this neighborhood. He wants to erase his mother's legacy. I won't let him." A slow smile spread across Arthur's face. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said. "Now, let's get to work. Show me what you have in that ledger of yours." For the next 2 hours, we went through my records, page by page. Arthur's initial concern turned to quiet astonishment, then to outright admiration. We made phone calls, drafted documents, and laid the groundwork for our counterattack. When I left his office, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city streets. I felt a sense of calm settle over me, the fear and anger replaced by a cold, clear purpose. The next few weeks were a quiet torment. David, true to his word, began parading developers and architects through the house. They would walk through the rooms, pointing and making notes on their tablets, speaking of demolition and excavation as if I weren't even there. I became a ghost in my own home, an invisible obstacle they were all waiting to see, removed. Susan would sometimes accompany them, her expression a mixture of pity and impatience. She once left a brochure for the senior living community on the kitchen table, a glossy pamphlet filled with smiling, white-haired seniors playing shuffleboard. It was a petty, cruel gesture, and it only hardened my resolve. I continued my quiet life, watering Eleanor's roses, writing in my ledger, and waiting. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was here, and I was ready. The day of the deposition arrived. It was not held in a grand courtroom, as I had pictured, but in a sterile, windowless conference room in a high-rise building downtown. The air was dry and smelled faintly of industrial carpet cleaner, a sharp, chemical scent that bore no resemblance to the familiar smell of old wood and rosewater at home. The only sound was the low, oppressive hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I sat on one side of a long, polished mahogany table, a decorative bowl of artificial fruit mocking me from its center. Arthur sat beside me, his ancient leather briefcase resting on his lap. He looked perfectly at ease, as if he were settling in for a pleasant chat. On the other side sat David, his wife Susan, and their lawyer. The lawyer, a man named Harrison, looked expensive. He wore a razor-sharp suit, a silk tie, and a watch that probably cost more than my bus pass for the last 20 years. He radiated a cold, aggressive energy. David, catching my eye, gave me a small, pitying smile, the kind one gives to a confused child. Susan, however, did not bother to hide her disdain. She stared at my simple, mended wool coat, then at my scuffed but comfortable shoes. Her gaze was an inventory of my failures, a confirmation of everything she believed about me, that I was old, poor, and irrelevant. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, her fingers poised over her stenotype machine, ready to capture every word. "Let's begin," Harrison said, his voice as smooth and hard as the table. "This is a deposition in the matter of the estate of Eleanor Bishop. We are here to establish the uncontested right of Mr. Kame, David Bishop, to take possession of the property at 42 Oak Street, and to address the presence of the current occupant, Ms. Clara Vance." He said the word presence as if I were a cockroach infestation, not a person. For the first hour, Harrison's questions were a relentless polite assault. He was a surgeon, and his words were scalpels, designed to cut away any shred of dignity or legal standing I might have. "Ms. Vance, you have resided at 42 Oak Street for 42 years. Is that correct?" "Yes," I replied. My voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. "And during that time, you never paid rent to your sister, Ms. Bishop, did you?" "Eleanor and I had an arrangement. I managed the household. I paid for the upkeep, the utilities, the repairs." But you never paid rent," Harrison cut in, a predator scenting blood. "You had no formal, written lease. You were, legally speaking, a guest in your sister's home. Is that not true?" I gripped the ledger in my lap. Its familiar leather, a comfort. I was her sister. A sister. Yes, a beloved sister. I'm sure. He offered a completely insincere smile, but not the owner. Upon her passing, the property transferred solely to her son, Mr. Bishop, as per her will. You understand that, don't you? I looked at David. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was studying a spot on the wall, feigning a bored detachment, as if this whole ugly affair was beneath him. I understand he believes that, I said. Harrison's smile widened. It's not a matter of belief. Ms. Vance, it's a matter of law. Now, regarding your financial situation, you receive a monthly Social Security check. Correct. I do. And aside from that, you have no other declared income, no pension, no significant savings. This was the trap. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. On paper, I was exactly who they thought I was. My true assets, my life's work, were hidden deep within the trust, shielded from sight. I have enough, I said quietly. Enough for what Harrison scoffed, leaning forward. Enough to challenge the legal heir to a multi-million-dollar property. Enough to find new housing in this hyper-inflated market. Or enough, he slowed his words for emphasis, to accept the very generous relocation package, Mr. Free. Bishop has offered you out of the goodness of his heart. The lie of it, the goodness of his heart, was a spark on dry tinder. I am not interested in his package, I stated. David sighed loudly. A dramatic, theatrical sound of a long-suffering man. Aunt Clara, please, he said, turning to me with a look of pained exasperation. We are trying to help you. We've found you a nice place. Just take the offer. Don't make this ugly. It was then that Arthur cleared his throat. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the room. Mr. Harrison, he said, his voice mild and grandfatherly. My client is not here to accept your client's generous offer. She is not here to discuss relocation. She is here to contest the very validity of his claim to the property. Harrison actually laughed. A short, barking sound. Contest it. On what grounds sentimental attachment that's not a legal standing? Mr. Finney, you, of all people, should know that. On the grounds of ownership, Arthur said simply. A heavy silence fell over the room. The court reporter's fingers paused. David sat up straight, his bored expression vanishing, replaced by confusion. Susan's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together. Ownership, David repeated, his voice sharp. That's absurd. My mother left me the house. It's in her will. We have the deed. Yes, the deed, Arthur said, nodding amiably. The deed your mother held. A quitclaim deed, I believe, but we contend that the chain of title is complicated. This neighborhood, Mr. Harrison, has a very complex history of land rights, zoning overlays, and shared titles. It's quite fascinating, really. This was the bait, and Harrison took it immediately. He saw a loophole. A desperate. Old-timer's tactic. Complicated, he scoffed, spreading his hands. It's a simple residential plot. Mr. Finney, if you're planning to drag this out by claiming some obscure zoning ordinance from 1920, I assure you, it won't work. The city is backing the redevelopment plan for this entire district. The zoning is clear. The titles are clear. Are they? Arthur asked, his eyes wide with mock innocence. David, unable to stop himself, leaned forward, his arrogance flooding back. He was the expert now. This is a waste of time. My partners and I have spent 6 months auditing this entire district. The titles are a mess, he said, proud of his own cleverness. A lot of abandoned lots. Lapsed taxes. Absentee owners. It's a legal goldmine for someone who knows how to navigate it. But 42 Oak Street is the one solid piece of ground in the whole mess. It's the anchor property. My mother's title was clean. To prove our point, Harrison continued, pulling a thick, bound file from his briefcase. We had an independent appraisal done, not just on the house, but on the entirety of Ms. Bishop's estate, filed with the probate court. As you know, she owned little else. A small bank account. Some furniture. He slid the document toward Arthur. This is the certified asset valuation. It lists 42 Oak Street as the sole significant asset. Arthur opened the document. He scanned the first page. Then the second. I watched his face. His expression didn't change, but his grip on his pen tightened almost imperceptibly. This is a very thorough document, Arthur said. It states here, on page 4, that a thorough title search of the surrounding properties confirms that 42 Oak Street is the only parcel titled to the Bishop family, free and clear of all liens and encumbrances. Exactly, David said, crossing his arms, looking triumphant. The only one. Now, are we done here? Can we agree to the eviction date? Or do we need to have you formally sanctioned for wasting our time? This was the moment. My original plan, as Arthur and I had discussed, was simply to reveal my ownership of 42 Oak Street, which I had quietly transferred into the trust years ago while granting Eleanor lifetime rights to live there. It would have been a simple, clean victory, enough to stop the eviction and save my home. But David, in his greed, had done something monumentally, beautifully stupid. He hadn't just tried to evict me, he had lied. He had lied to the court. That asset valuation, which he had just sworn under oath was true, was a fabrication, a deliberate falsehood designed to streamline the probate process and consolidate his power over the entire district he planned to buy and demolish. He had just testified that the surrounding titles were a mess, yet simultaneously submitted a document swearing they were clear and that 42 Oak Street was the only asset. He had handed us the gun and pointed it at his own foot. Arthur looked at me. His eyes posed a silent question. Do we stick to the simple plan? Or do we end this? Right here. Right now. I thought of Eleanor. I thought of his bingo comment. I thought of the glossy brochure for the senior home. I thought of the neighbors who had trusted me for 15 years. I met Arthur's gaze and gave a single, almost imperceptible, nod. Arthur turned a page in the document. Mr. Harrison, he said, and his voice was no longer mild. It had a new, sharper edge, a cold steel that cut through the room. You certified this document. You submitted it to the probate court. You are aware of the penalties for perjury and filing fraudulent documents. Harrison's smile faltered. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Of course, this document is accurate. Is it? Arthur asked. Because, Mr. Bishop, you just testified, under oath, that your partners audited this district and found the titles to be a mess. Yet this document, which you also certified, claims they are clear. A minor contradiction. Perhaps. It's semantics, David stammered, color rising in his neck. He was realizing his mistake. It's perjury, Arthur replied, his voice like ice. But that, gentlemen, is the least of your problems today. He reached down to his ancient briefcase, took a deep breath, and pulled out my worn, leather-bound ledger. He placed it on the table with a solid, definitive thud that echoed in the silent room. David actually laughed. A high-pitched, nervous sound. Oh, for God's sake. Are you submitting my aunt's diary as evidence? We're done. He started to stand up. Sit down. Mr. Bishop, Arthur commanded, and his voice had a sudden, booming authority that made David freeze, half out of his chair. This diary is the operational ledger for a private holding company registered in this state. Arthur's gaze locked onto David. A company, I might add, that has been quietly paying the property taxes on this entire 4-block district for over a decade. A company called the Eleanor Preservation Trust. Susan's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. David's face had gone the color of chalk. And this, Arthur continued, tapping the ledger with his finger, is just the summary. The details, Mr. Harrison, are what you're going to find truly complicated. The silence in the room was absolute, It was no longer the quiet of a stuffy conference room, but a heavy, ringing silence, the kind that follows a massive explosion. The only sound was the faint, frantic scratching of the court reporter's machine as she tried to capture Arthur's last words. David stood frozen, half out of his chair, his face a mask of disbelief. Susan's perfectly applied lipstick was now a stark slash of color against her ghostly white skin. Her hand was still at her mouth, as if to physically hold back a scream. Harrison, the slick, expensive lover, simply stared at the ledger on the table as if it were a venomous snake. His professional composure had shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. The Eleanor Preservation Trust, David finally stammered, sinking back into his chair. The words sounded foreign and absurd in his mouth. What is that? I've never heard of it. I'm not surprised, Arthur said, his voice calm and measured. He opened the ledger to the first page, where a charter document was neatly pasted. It was established 15 years ago. Its stated mission is to acquire and preserve properties of historical and community value within the Oak Street district, protecting them from predatory development and ensuring affordable housing for long-term residents. Arthur looked up, his gaze sweeping over David and Harrison, the sole trustee and director of the foundation. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. Is my client, Ms. Clara Vance. I watched as the gears turned in David's mind, the frantic calculations of a man watching his entire world crumble. He looked from the ledger to Arthur, and then finally, his eyes landed on me. For the first time, he was truly seeing me. Not as his dotty old aunt, not as a piece of sentimental clutter, but as the architect of his ruin. The confusion in his eyes morphed into a dark, sputtering rage. You, he spat, his voice trembling. You don't have 2 pennies to rub together. How could you possibly? Assumptions can be costly. Mr. Bishop, Arthur interjected smoothly. He gestured to me. For 40 years, while you and your family were focused on a more conspicuous form of success, Ms. Vance was quietly building a significant portfolio through shrewd, low-profile investments. She has lived modestly not out of necessity, but by choice. She chose to pour her resources not into fancy cars or designer clothes, but into protecting her sister, her home, and her community. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the narrative David had built his life around. He was the successful one, the Ivy League graduate, the savvy businessman. I was the failure, the spinster aunt living on charity. The foundation of his superiority was cracking, and he couldn't stand it. This is a trick, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. It's a fraud. She's a crazy old woman. You can't possibly own the whole neighborhood. Oh, but we can. And we do, Arthur said. He reached into his briefcase again and pulled out a thin, elegant object. It was the antique brass key from the chain around my neck. Mr. Harrison, Arthur said, holding up the key. You're a man who appreciates the finer things. I'm sure you recognize the insignia of the First National Bank's private safe deposit services. He placed the key on the table. In a box downtown, opened by this key, you will find the original, certified deeds to every single property on this map. He tapped the developer's blueprint, all legally signed over and registered to the Eleanor Preservation Trust over the last 15 years. He then pushed the fraudulent asset valuation back towards Harrison, which makes this document not just perjury, but a rather spectacular case of mail and wire fraud. I believe the federal prosecutors take a rather dim view of that sort of thing. Harrison slumped in his chair as if his spine had dissolved. His career was flashing before his eyes. Susan began to sob. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, gulping sobs of terror. David was beyond rage now. He was in a state of shock, his face slack, his eyes vacant. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the room, it carried like a bell. You were right about one thing. David, I said, looking directly at him. Your mother was a sentimental woman. She loved this house. She loved this neighborhood. She loved the people in it. She would have been heartbroken to know you intended to destroy it all for money. The mention of his mother seemed to break through his shock. A flicker of something shame perhaps crossed his face. He started, but no words came out. The Eleanor Preservation Trust was named for her. I continued softly. Everything I have built, I built to honor the values she held. Values of community, loyalty, and kindness. Values you seem to have forgotten. We sat there for a long moment, as the full weight of the new reality settled upon them. They were ruined. Not just financially, but publicly. The developers would abandon them. The banks would call in their loans. And the threat of legal action would hang over them for years. Finally, Arthur began to pack his briefcase. I believe this deposition is concluded, he said, with an air of finality. Mr. Harrison, I will expect your client's formal withdrawal of the eviction notice by the end of the day. As for the matter of the fraudulent probate filing, we will be in touch. As we stood to leave, I paused by David's chair. He wouldn't look at me. He was staring at his hands, which were clasped so tightly on the table. His knuckles were white. For a fleeting instant, I felt a pang of something that might have been pity. He was my sister's son, and despite his cruelty, he was still family. This didn't have to happen. David, I said, all you had to do was be kind. I walked out of that cold, sterile room and back into the sunlight, leaving the wreckage of their lives behind me. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel vengeful. I simply felt a profound sense of peace. The storm had passed. My home was safe. My promise to Eleanor was kept. The next day, a small, hand-delivered envelope appeared on my doorstep. Inside was not a legal document, but a single sheet of paper, folded in 3. It was a handwritten letter from David. It was short, the handwriting almost illegible in places. It was not an apology. Not really. It was too full of anger and shame for that. But it was a concession. It was the raw, painful confession of a man who had lost everything and was only just beginning to understand why. He wrote about his mother, about the pressure he'd felt to be more successful than his father, to prove himself in a world that only valued money. He wrote that he had despised the old house because it reminded him of a simpler, kinder world he felt he could never measure up to. It was not a plea for forgiveness, but a plea for understanding. And as I folded the letter and placed it in my ledger, I realized the final piece of my work was not yet finished. It wasn't enough to save the buildings. I had to see if there was anything left to save of the boy my sister had loved so much. I offered him a job. Not a position of power, but a job on the maintenance crew for the trust, repairing the very houses he had planned to demolish. It was a chance not for redemption, but for restitution, a chance to rebuild, with his own hands, something of real and lasting value. My life is quiet again now. The legal battles are over. The trust is secure. From my armchair by the window, I watch the seasons change on Oak Street. I see children playing, neighbors chatting over fences, the familiar rhythms of a community that is safe and whole. True wealth, I have learned, is not a number in a bank account. It is the feeling of the sun on your face in a garden you have tended. It is the knowledge that you have kept a promise. It is the quiet, steady work of building something that will last. Have you ever felt underestimated by those you love? Have you ever had to fight for something that mattered more than money? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Your experiences are a powerful reminder that strength often comes in the quietest forms. If my story touched your heart, please give this video a like, and subscribe for more real-life stories about family by Common and LibraryBurvox.org, legacy, and the true meaning of home. And please, share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the most valuable things in life are the ones that cannot be bought or sold. Thank you for listening.